Welcome to the broadcast, my fruits. I hope you're very well. We have serious matters to discuss today. It will be a serious broadcast in tone, so I will endeavour to bring some light-hearted coziness to the broadcasts over the next few days to introduce some balance, but the mood here does undulate depending on what's going on in the world and what I'm compelled to address. And there are serious matters, there are grave matters to discuss. Thank you to those of you who treated me to a birthday cup of coffee or a birthday slice of cake. Thank you so much. I have to say that after a month of going cold turkey on coffee and just having one a week to try and beat my addiction to one coffee a day, well, thanks to you and your tip jar treats for my cup of coffee, I've fallen off the wagon, my dear. Fallen right off the wagon, and I'm back on the daily coffee. That's the one thing, my dear. You know, I can smoke away like a trooper and chain smoke for a weekend or a week or an entire month. Then I can put that pack of fags away and never think about them again until I take the next drink. And when I take the next drink, it has to be accompanied by a cigarette. So I make no apologies for it. I've learned to embrace the fact. But I can go and have gone literally years without either booze or fags without giving them a second thought. But when it comes to coffee, that's a difficult one. That's a difficult one. I have done it for about 6 months before. But then as soon as you start taking the little sip and get used to that oh so cosy hug just once a day, that little embrace in the morning, it's just so tempting, isn't it? But life is for the small pleasures, isn't it? And for the odd temptation. We can't all be goodies and we can't all be too pure to be pink. And I am a verified, certified member of the Pink Ladies Club, and I know that many of you fruity tooties are as well, so thanks again. On with the show. And first of all, I'm going to summarise today's news regarding Prince Harry. Have you heard? Ha ha! Yes, and explain where we are as succinctly as I can to my understanding. And depending on your news sources, you would have seen some in jubilation that Harry's court case will proceed, and others who are more disparaging taking note of the fact that much of it has been dismissed out of hand. Well, the truth lies somewhere between the two, but actually the news is not great for our dear Royal Highness, the Duke of Sussex. No, it's really not great. So, I will dive right in. Prince Harry versus News Group Newspapers, NGN. To summarise today's decision made by Justice Fancourt at the High Court, Harry can proceed with allegations of unlawful information gathering and the illegal use of private investigators from the mid-1990s to 2016. But, big but, unlike Harry's, Justice Fancourt dismissed Harry's hacking claims. Chucked out, thrown out, disregarded. And one reason being that the allegations were made too late. Unlike William's, remember your brother, Harry, Prince William, who decided to settle this case, got rid of News of the World single-handedly, accepted £1 million and donated it straight to charity. Yes, what was the more mature thing to do? Well, seems like William had the right idea, or should I say, the kingly idea. Whereas your allegations were made too late, darling, too late. Under UK law, claimants have 6 years after a privacy breach, 6 years, in which to take action. Harry's claim that he was unable to bring the hacking allegations sooner owing to a secret deal. Remember, we kept hearing about this secret deal betwixt the palace and the publishers. He was the only one that had heard about this deal, though, and nobody from the palace was forthcoming to back up those claims. Well, the judge branded those claims of a secret deal implausible. Implausible and inherently unlikely. So I think reading between the lines of those words, what one can come away with is lies. Lies, in my personal, humble opinion. And so far I am still entitled to my own opinions. Despite the thought police, under the laws of this kingdom, I'm still entitled to them. Lies, fabrications, fantasies, concoctions, and confections of the mind, my dear. Cloud cuckoo! Cloud cuckoo. The existence of an agreement did not reach the necessary threshold of plausibility and cogency. Cogency. The definition of cogency is the quality of being clear, logical, and convincing. I'm afraid without the help of J.R. Mooringer, your recollections are still variable, Harold, my darling. Variable. Mr. Justice Fancourt ruled in favour of the argument by NGN that Prince Harry was aware enough of his phone hacking scandal to bring his case sooner. Yes, he knew enough that if he was so disgruntled, he could have made this claim much sooner than it was, rather than leaving all these years to pass. So all the claims of voicemail interception and phone hacking at the Sun and the News of the World will not be brought to trial. So just to confirm that, all of that nonsense that we had to wade through in Prince Harry's witness statement will not be brought to trial. NGN have said this is a significant victory, and it is. And it is, and I will read their statement in full a little later. But Harry's claims of blagging, what is known as blagging, which is the obtaining of confidential details by deception or impersonation, can proceed to trial. So that section of it will proceed. Justice Fancourt said that the remaining claims must be tried. I do not find this is a case where it's possible to say that one party is clearly the successful party. So that's all up in the air. But Mr. Justice Fancourt noted that the only evidence supporting the existence of this secret agreement was Harry's own arduous witness statement. That was my description of it being arduous, but nevertheless, which he described, Mr. Justice Fancourt described as vague and limited. Well, that just sums up the boy in totality, doesn't it, my dears? Vague and limited. Yes, there's your title for the sequel to the tome. Vague and limited. Recollections may vary. Yes, wonderful, Brandy. I could write it myself, couldn't I, my dears? Be a lot more entertaining and full of a lot more truth. The part of the damages claim that could now proceed to trial is due to begin in January, which is similar to the Hugh Grant claims in relation to his claims versus NGN with regards to the Sun, but his claims against the News of the World were settled in 2012. And let it be said that there are two sides to this lollipop. In relation to the judge's findings today in his decision, anything at all that illustrates Harry's recollections that might vary, his inability to grasp truth, and his habit of vague, limited recollections, anything that exposes that to the masses is gratefully and warmly received by me. And that is why I have taken an interest into what's coming out of this case. However, any unlawful activity against Harry that can be proved will be humbly acknowledged and duly honoured by me. If something has gone on, something wrong that he can prove, then that is fair enough. He has my backing there as well. But it is very heartwarming to see that Mr. Justice Fancourt seems not to be swayed thus far by Harry's dukedom or royal position or star power or mumblings of nonsense. No, he's not being swayed. Thank you, Mr. Justice Fancourt. So that can give us cause for encouragement, can't it? This court case is not taking place under the umbrella of the Harkle hype machine. Don't believe your own hype, Harkles, because Mr. Justice Fancourt is not Oprah Winfrey. No, not every audience to King Henry IX that never was is going to respond with the same reaction as Oprah. What? What? No, my dear, clutching the pearls with incredulity. They are more likely to respond with a, what's he on? What is he on? So, Newsgroup newspaper's statement in full. The High Court has today, in a significant victory for NGN, dismissed the Duke of Sussex's phone-hacking claims against both the News of the World and the Sun. As we reach the tail end of litigation, NGN is drawing a line under disputed matters, some of which date back more than 20 years ago. In arguing his case, the Duke of Sussex had alleged a secret agreement existed between him, Buckingham Palace, and NGN, which stopped NGN from asserting that the Duke's claim had been brought too late. The judge, Mr. Justice Fancourt, found his claims in relation to the alleged secret agreement were not plausible or credible. It is quite clear there was never any such agreement, and it is only the Duke who has ever asserted there was. Yes, bear that in mind, dear. It is only the Duke that has asserted that there was this nonsense secret agreement, this covert goings-on. I'll continue. Mr. Justice Fancourt then dismissed the Duke's phone-hacking claims against both the News of the World and the Sun on the grounds that the claim had been brought too late. This substantially reduces the scope of his legal claim. The exact nature and scope of any trial of the remainder will be the subject of further hearings. So we'll have to wait with bated breath to see how this all plays out over the next few months. Now, I wanted to for a few moments turn to the subject of Sinead O'Connor, may she rest in peace, who died yesterday, I believe, at the age of 56. Just with a few of my own personal thoughts. We all know what a tower of talent she was, what an extraordinary voice and musician and passionate, compassionate soul, a troubled soul. My own attachment to her is related to the song. We know that Nothing Compares to You is the biggie, isn't it? I'm not that familiar with her entire oeuvre, I have to tell you. I went through phases of listening to her, but I can't recall that many of her songs other than the big hits. But one that always struck me was a song called Thank You for Hearing Me. I think that's what it was called. That was the main lyric anyway. And it was a sort of refrain of the same, thank you for hearing me, thank you for loving me, thank you for knowing me, this kind of thing. And I remember hearing it years ago and it got into my head. But I never really heard it played. It was all just a recollection in my memory that I would use, and I would also use it during times of prayer. I always thought that this incantation, this thank you for hearing, thank you for listening, loving, I always thought it was a prayer recital, because she's been through various religious stages, hasn't she, to do with the Catholic Church and the Muslim religion and various other spiritual endeavours. I thought it was a prayer that she was reciting. I suppose in a way it was. But it was only perhaps last year that I bothered looking up the original version of it on YouTube. And I have to say I prefer some of the live versions just because I'm not that keen on the production of the single version. But I looked up the entire thing and played it all the way through, which I'd never really done since hearing it for the first time years ago. And I found that towards the end it has a dark twist. And instead of thank you for hearing me, loving me, knowing me, it takes a dark twist in the final verse. So spoiler alert if you don't want to know. It takes a dark twist and says basically, thank you for making me strong because thank you for breaking my heart. Plot twist, basically this person broke her heart, which made her strong in the end. So it was a little bit upsetting for me actually, because I enjoyed it as a prayer rather than as a poem of reconciliation between scorned lovers, presumably. It's the kind of song that I would like to hear Enya do actually. I don't think she does many covers. I'm a big fan of Enya, as some of you know. I love Enya. I think it would be fabulous for her to do, but in the style of a prayer, a pure prayer. When I heard the news that she died, of course I understand that it's unutterably sad, but I immediately felt, my instinct was, and I don't want to belittle what she meant to the world or what she gave to the world, but I instinctively felt that she was free, that she was released from a life that had moments of joy but seemed to be full of exquisite agony and a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. I followed her on and off throughout the years, and her mental difficulties seemed to be so overwhelming, but especially compounded in the last year or two because of the death of her own son. I do feel some sense of relief on her behalf. I saw that Morrissey was very angry at various celebrities for offering their condolences, as they are wont to do on social media, and having a big pity party of their own. He said, "Why is anybody surprised that Sinead O'Connor is dead? Who cared enough to save Judy Garland, Whitney Houston, Amy Winehouse, Marilyn Monroe, Billie Holiday? Where do you go when death can be the best outcome? Where do you go?" Well, I do think that that is a little bit unfair. I do believe that there were people trying to help Sinead O'Connor. I don't know the ins and outs in depth, but like many people who struggle mentally, some people are open to help, some people want to be helped actively, some people don't and refuse it, and some are perhaps halfway in between, which might have related to Sinead O'Connor. I'm not going to speak on her behalf, I don't know. But what I will say is he put Amy Winehouse's name in his mouth during those comparisons. Well, I'm afraid when you say Morrissey, who cared enough to save Amy Winehouse, she was surrounded by people who care. Yes, she went through her life and met many chances that weren't especially invested in her health or her sobriety, but there were many, 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 including friends and family, who would have gone to the ends of the earth to ensure her survival and her health. If you want some insight on that, you can read a biography that I've recommended before, written by Sylvia Patterson via Tyler James, the author of My Amy. Tyler James was Amy's very close best friend throughout her life. Saw the ups and the downs. It's a brilliant biography. I think it's fantastic. I knew Amy Winehouse, as I've mentioned before, and I know a lot about that world and the people that were around her. And I'm here to tell you, and I'm here to tell Morrissey, that he needn't put Amy Winehouse's name in his mouth in that matter, because there were people that cared enough to save her. And she almost was saved. She had been clean of drugs for a very long time when she died. It was alcohol. And she was really on the way home. She was really on the way home and had been accepting help for a very long time when she passed away, but she made that final slip up and went on a bender with the old booze. That's what it was. Just like when I said at the start of this broadcast, all it takes is just that little sip of coffee for me, just as a little treat, and I'm back on it day after day after day. Well, other substances have a vice-like grip. It depends on one's mentality as well, how susceptible one is to these addictive substances. So I just wanted to throw that in there because I wasn't pleased with what Morrissey said, although I can understand his emotions. But I would wager that there were people behind the scenes that had tried to help and aid Sinead O'Connor through the years. In fact, I know that several years ago there were certainly efforts in that direction made. I also saw her speak many times on social media about having to turn to welfare, for example, and this was fairly recently, with financial woes. But then conversely, we saw last month she moved into a new apartment, a penthouse apartment, costing £3,000 a month. Well, if what I read is true, and if she could afford an apartment at £3,000 a month, then I would have to reject the notion that she was somehow destitute. £3,000 a month is a lot, so it is difficult to get to the kernel of truth in relation to her lifestyle, what was going on in her life in the lead up to her death. And as of yet, we have no confirmation of the way in which she died, the manner she died, and it seems that there is going to have to be an autopsy before we hear any information one way or the other. But it is all the heartbreak of mental challenges, isn't it, that people face. But Sinead O'Connor, now that you are an angel, thank you for serenading us. We loved your voice, we will love your voice, and your humanity will always be remembered as a cherished legacy. Now to the subject of Nigel Farage. It was 9 days ago, I believe, when I brought you my broadcast on the subject of Nigel Farage and free speech, and it was very warmly received by you. Your comments were fantastic. I haven't had time to go through all of them yet, but they were fantastic. And everything that I predicted came to pass, didn't it? Yes. Dame Alison Rose stepped down from her position, heading up NatWest Bank, because Coutts is a subsidiary of NatWest. It became a national scandal over the next few days, a national scandal, and I am glad that it did. And as of today, just today, the chief executive of Coutts, Peter Flavel, resigned this afternoon. Yes, he resigned. And before I go on, I've got to say that I happen to know that Dame Alison Rose and Peter Flavel are nice people. Yes, they are. And they're both appreciated for their work. And I have no intention of demonising them, as some in the press and beyond have done. But in the wake of what has transpired, I believe this is a watershed moment. Hopefully it's a watershed moment when people had to be made an example of, and standards had to be adhered to. Shares in NatWest have slumped as a result of all of this drama. 3% yesterday, I think more today, but it's wiped £850 million at least, this was yesterday, off of the stock market value of the bank, which is still 39% taxpayer owned. And I have noticed that the government, the Conservative government, have jumped on this. And in many ways it's wonderful to see them jumping on this, being all over it, and holding people responsible for their actions, holding banks responsible. But there is also most certainly a lot of showboating going on. Where were you, Conservative government, over the last 13 years as you led this nation? You've been given 13 years so far, since 2010, to steer us and guide us. Where were you? I see ministers reading the Riot Act to other banks on woke culture and woke capitalism. Well, you've been in charge for a decade and a half, the best part of, and you've stood by and let this happen. You have stood by. It was on your watch when everything about this great kingdom deteriorated and seems to be damaged beyond repair. It was on your watch. A Conservative government that went on to have a huge historical majority at the last general election. A huge majority of this Conservative government has stood by and allowed this extreme left wing, and I'm not disparaging everybody from the left, most of my loved ones in my life swing somewhat left, but what was a sort of far left ideology has infiltrated this nation. Ideas from the wokest segments, it has to be said, of the United States. And I have a great love for the United States and most of what it inspires in this nation. We've had very good inspiration and good elements from those American shores that have blessed our nation. But just as the British Empire affected the colonies with some good things and some bad things, it's the same with the way that the influence of America has inspired us. And it just so happens that in the last few years, it hasn't been good what's been coming over from the United States. This woke ideology springs from there, and we've allowed it to invade our culture and our institutions. And now you scream, Tory ministers, about it. You stood by and watched as it all happened. And Boris Johnson has a hide. He's got a brass neck. He's not even in government anymore. He's writing away for the Daily Mail, squawking and screeching about how terrible it all is. Well, you were our last hope, Boris Johnson. People that never really wanted to vote for you or Tory all gave you the benefit of the doubt and did it, yes, to save us from the clutches of Jeremy Corbyn, but we might not as well have bothered. You were kind of Corbyn light, really, Labour light. It was your opportunity with the vast majority to redress the balance and speak for the majority of this nation, the majority that voted you and gave you their trust to restore British sensibilities and sweep away from this wokey tide. Well, you just opened the floodgates. Let the Titanic become subsumed and submerged and drown. Well, this whole incident is a furore, and it seems to be drumming up compensation claims from many other customers and clients of many banks. A healthy human resources in any institution, whether banks or beyond, is healthy and it's great. But cosseting minority voices, whether it's those within the letters community or various ethnicities, minority ethnicities or cultures or religions, well, raising them above everybody else is not cricket. No, I don't accept that. Equal rights, yes. Meritocracy, yes. Equality, yes. But special privileges for minorities, affirmative action for minorities, no. No. Bending over backwards to accommodate the needs of those with various political ideologies, no. Quite simply no. Well, Peter Flavel, the chief executive of Coutts that resigned today, says in his resignation statement, "In the handling of Mr. Farage's case, we have fallen below the bank's high standards of personal service. As CEO of Coutts, it is right that I bear ultimate responsibility for this, which is why I am stepping down." Well, yes, it is a great shame that people such as Dame Alison Rose, who is a lifer, she is a lifer at NatWest, she's worked there all her life, she is loved by staff and employees alike. She got on very well with Catherine, it has to be said, with Princess Catherine earlier in the various ventures. And I have heard people speak very well about her, so I'm not rejoicing in her downfall at all. I think she knew very little of what was going on with Coutts. But privacy is sacrosanct at institutions like banks. It's sacrosanct. I don't care if it's a private bank, and this particular bank, Coutts, is taxpayer funded as well. And a bank is a bank is a bank. There are forums, such as banks, where people need to go with the expectation of privacy and with the expectation that they are not there to be chaperoned or lectured to or herded and shepherded into political ideas and ideology. No, my dear. Especially political ideologies and big rainbow bunting flags that deflect from the bank's huge profits. That is why they paint everything with rainbows and shroud everything in kindness and diversity, with no real accepting of diversity of thought and opinion and of character. All this kindness branding, well, they weren't very kind to the likes of Nigel Farage, and I don't have a particular fondness for Nigel Farage, but they're not very kind to anybody that dares disagree with them. When Dame Alison Rose did finally step down from her appointment, she admitted a serious error of judgment, and it was. She was gossiping with a BBC journalist, who then went to her for a second time to confirm what she'd said. I'm not going to trot out the full story. You've either read the papers or you haven't. But this discussion that she has, by her own admittance, was indiscreet and unacceptable. As a lifer, she should know what is acceptable and what is not, and discussing the matters of anybody, with anybody, but in particular a BBC journalist, is totally unacceptable. But let's hope this is a warning shot on the positive side. This is a huge story here in the kingdom. It's dominating headlines, has for the past week. This is the kind of warning shot that we need. It's the reason why I stuck my neck out 9 days ago and made a broadcast of that kind and devoted it to Nigel Farage on this channel, because we are losing the battle on wokedom. We all see it, we all know it. We're losing the battle. And the young generations coming up are already infected. Their normal is already something very different and very warped from what it should be, to be quite honest with you. losing the battle under oceans of ideology. So let's hope this is a clarion call for maturity, the return of maturity. That's what I miss. I don't want to walk into a formal, grown-up institution like a bank and be greeted with rainbows. And I'm using that symbolically. It could be anything. I want to just walk in. And that dates me anyway, because you can barely walk into a branch now. They close all the branches, they close the cash points, everything has to be done online. Despite all the billions and gazillions of profits they have, I'm not sure how they can't afford to pay for 3 or 4 desk clerks, cashiers, and rent a small office space, but apparently they're all cast aside. But all I demand is professionalism, efficiency. Nobody has to be overbearingly kind to me, and I don't want to be forced into being overbearingly kind to anyone else. Just do your job. Do your job. It's all very well intentioned, all this presiding over kindness and inclusivity and diversity culture, but the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So that's what we're walking into, my dear. They need priorities to be sorted out. It's a bank. It is not a Buddhist retreat centre. If you're so invested in kindness and decency and all the virtues under the sun, then form a Buddhist retreat centre. Go into that sector, Dame Alison and Peter Flavel. Go into the Buddhist retreat centre, become some sort of yogi, and it'll go down very well. But banks aren't about kindness, they're about money. If you esteem those qualities of kindness and goodness and being gentle, then be those things. Be those things. Not because you're on a salary of over £5 million, Dame Alison Rose, but because it actually means something to you. But don't impose them on other individuals. Be those things yourself, instead of encouraging and enlisting these forms of indoctrination. Because really what you're doing is unkind and exclusive, and you loathe diversity. Just the very idea of a bank like Coutts, the exclusive members bank, Coutts, telling us how all-embracing and inclusive we need to be. One of the most exclusive banks in the kingdom, not the most exclusive, but one of them, I ask you. The hypocrisy. You loathe diversity. You loathe diversity, Coutts. So stop peeing on our legs, telling us it's raining, by telling us that you admire it, you want diversity. No, you evidently don't. You don't want diversity of thought or opinion. You want everybody to march to the beat of your own drum. Well, this time you've really put your foot in it. This time you've got jelly on your face, haven't you, my dear? And I'm hoping that other institutions are going to end up with jelly on their face and egg on their face. One of those institutions, if reports are to be believed, being the Yorkshire Building Society. And I'm only going on what Richard Fothergill tells us, the Reverend Richard Fothergill. I'm sure some of you will have seen this story over the last few months, but for those of you that haven't, and those who are abroad get interested in this kind of thing, the Reverend Richard Fothergill has been with what we call a building society here in the kingdom, the Yorkshire Building Society, for 17 years, investing with them. Well, a few weeks ago, perhaps it was months, he was invited to give general feedback. You know, I get sick of all these emails coming through. Please rate us, please give us feedback. It's a real bugbear of mine, just like self-service checkouts. I loathe them, I hate them, and I always ignore them. But he was, they pop up, and apparently they said to Richard Fothergill, these notices, these emails, how are you doing? We want to hear from you. We want your feedback. How are you doing? So annoying, isn't it? You know, I hate it when they use my first name as well. It's one of my things. It's too familiar. It's too convivial to be treated like a friend or like a child texting. You know, last year I had to reach out to a private clinic for a procedure, a very, very minor procedure. I had to reach out to a clinic and communicate with them over a procedure. And when they first responded to me, they texted me, and the text was all Christian names. There was no surname involved. No sir, madam, to whom it may concern. Immediately I was addressed. It was all Christian names, them and me, and it was all emojis, and it was all texting me as if I was a friend and we're talking about a professional clinical practice. I wasn't pleased. I wish I'd flagged it up, because I ended up having some problems with the way that the procedure and the matter was handled. And it becomes all the more difficult to broach it when they are trying to get all chummy with you from the outset. So I would advise any of you that find this thing happening to put them right immediately, to tell them that they are talking to Mr. Smith or Mrs. Jones, and not get involved with all this emoji texty culture, because I can imagine that it's springing up everywhere. I'm digressing, but anyway. He was asked how he was doing. We want to hear from you. And Richard Fothergill says that Yorkshire Building Society had been actively promoting Pride Month. So yes, this was recently. You know, seeing all the promotion for Pride Month popping up everywhere. Well, he claims that he responded to this questionnaire. He gave 2 polite paragraphs, he says. And the first point that he made was that it is better to spend energy as a financial institution and focus on being a bank instead of focusing on Pride Month. And his second point was that as a minister in a church, he expressed ethical concerns about the T element of LGBT, the trans element, and how transgender ideology is impacting children. Well, this doesn't matter whether or not you agree with his opinions or his points. This isn't about that. He thought that his notes would be ignored anyway. He didn't expect anyone to come back with him or even read what they were. Well, 2 weeks went by. 2 weeks went by without a word, and then a letter arrived. And the letter said, on behalf of the Yorkshire Building Society, that his comments that had been read will not stand. We must protect our workforce from prejudice, and that the relationship between us has been fundamentally broken down. I ask you, can you believe this? This is what happened. Some mentally deficient nincompoop or some indoctrinated Jobsworth at the other end had read these rational, reasonable comments, whether or not you agree with them, and decided that the relationship had broken down and the account would be closed. I can't believe this as I'm reading this out to you, that this has been going on in our kingdom. All he did was challenge their straying into contentious social issues as a bank. They have no business straying into those issues, and they asked for his opinion, and he gave his opinion, politely, so he says. Well, that wasn't good enough for Yorkshire Building Society. I don't care what the issue is. You are a banking facility. You are not an arbiter on high of morality and ethics. Stay in your lane. I wonder what Yorkshire Building Society's message is to all of their, let's say, traditional Christian customers up and down the kingdom, who might share a similar view or might not. To Reverend Fothergill, to all of those customers and all of the Muslim customers. Do you think that they all share Yorkshire Building Society's open-minded approach to Pride Month and all of the LGBT, or various religions, or those without a religion? That all these various other communities, which I'm sure, especially if they're minority communities or cultures or creeds or religion, I'm sure they don't want to offend any of them, and they want to keep and hold them close to be inclusive. Well, what would you think of their opinion on Pride Month and anything to do with the letters community? Because I'm sure that many of those communities wouldn't be quite so all-embracing. And what about all the other people out there who are not straight, that don't identify as heterosexual, but also don't adhere to all these ideologies and think tanks and organisations behind the scenes, such as Stonewall or Mermaids? Stonewall, for example, with all their diversity champions that have to be, they insist that they issue guidance to everybody. Everyone has to sign up to Stonewall and enlist diversity champions for the workplace. It's a very lucrative new industry, and a spotlight is now being shined on this industry. And actually, quite a few have exited from this scheme over the last couple of years, including Channel 4, the Cabinet Office, Ofcom. They've seen the light. They've begun to see the light of this racket. It is a racket because companies such as Stonewall, who started out with a real cause and made real progress and did some real good, well, after they attained equality and tolerance, they decided that it would be more lucrative if they turned their need for equal rights into privileges and adding a T to the L and the G and the B. And I speak as somebody, if I was to come under the umbrella of the letters community, it would be under that letter T. That is the one that I would more closely associate with in many ways. But I have certainly noticed the sinister way that they have become extraordinarily successful by inserting themselves politically into every institution, or so it seems. Well, the world seems to be waking up to it. And I've got to tell you, I've had quite a bit of experience in quite a number of sectors in the working place, town, country, all over the shop, mixed with a lot of types of people, as I'm sure many of you have. Well, I will tell you, the gay people that I know, the lesbians that I know, the trans people that I know and that I mix with, none of them associate with this LGBTQIA plus nonsense. Every time I hear someone use that expression, when they actually say all of those letters, yes, well, you've got to ask the LGBTQIA plus industry, I look at them and I think, I feel pity for them in some way. I feel horror sometimes, I feel anger, sometimes pity that you have actually been coaxed into using such a stupid, dummy expression. The gay community is enough, or the letters community if you must, but actually to have been shepherded. I mean, think about it. If you do it, if you actually do it, you are still excluding somebody. Oh no, well, they put the plus there, didn't they, so that they could be all-embracing and include everyone. Do you not see the madness of it? Do you not see the madness of it? But my point is that nobody mature and rational uses that kind of thing. Maybe a few in the art world do, I'll say that, maybe a few in various industries. And some, I should say, that are involved in executive committees, this kind of thing, because they've been instructed that this is the way that they have to speak. But most of the gays, lesbians and trans that act like grown-ups don't have anything to do with this kind of silliness and are really quite embarrassed by it and cringe at it. They don't cringe at the activism of yesteryear that was very much required, or some of the ongoing activism in some ways, but all the wokey madness that we see and the ideologies and the ever-expanding letters community, most of them behave like school kids, and no matter what age, have the mentality of school kids and have a lot of mental difficulties. And yes, one can have compassion for those with mental difficulties and anxieties, but my sympathy for them ends when it affects everybody else and when the lunatics take over the asylum, my dear, and I make no apologies or no bones about it. The lunatics took over the asylum. Everyone, including the government, stood and watched by as it happened. And now they're throwing complaints out about it. Well, I've never experienced, I've experienced discrimination in my life, for sure, and much of it made my childhood an absolute misery. So it's not as if I've gone through plain sailing. I understand a lot of the concerns that people have in a dramatic way that many of you will never understand and that I will never go into on this forum. I understand it. But when it comes to things like walking into a bank and experiencing discrimination, no. That has not been my experience here in the kingdom. Or, walking into a formal establishment. I mean, if someone wants to raise an eyebrow, they have the right to do that. But no member of the letters community walks into a bank and gets discriminated against. I'm sorry, it just doesn't happen, and it hasn't happened for decades in the kingdom. You don't need to paint all of the walls the colour of the rainbow and give everybody badges with 8 genders on to make everybody feel welcome. You don't. We aren't all a bit special. We don't all need to be greeted with the yellow brick road painted on the floor when you walk into a bank and Shirley Bassey playing through the speakers. No, we don't. I mean, it sounds very nice, but no, we don't all want that sort of entrance. I want formality and neutrality. I want courtesy and professionalism and competence. And that is what I've always had in the kingdom. I want no queues. That would be very nice, to walk in without a queue in a post office or a bank. That's the kind of thing that would impress me. I don't want to be embraced as a member of the letters community or the queer community. No. So another few rants today, my dears. Thank you for indulging me and allowing me to get it out of my system. One of the reasons I enjoy doing it is because I'm told in the comments that you seem to experience a sort of catharsis if you happen to chime in agreement with what I say, and you hear me get exercised about it. It helps you, and I understand that as well, because I will often watch people or listen to people on podcasting that are chiming in agreement with certain things, and it has a sort of communal sense of expression, doesn't it, my dears? So I hope you'll take it in that way, and I thank you for joining me. We'll try and get onto some more light-hearted stuff and some cosy chats coming up, but it depends what comes out in the press and what's in the news and what's hot and what's not. But we're always hot, aren't we, my dear? We're always hot tart, we're always fruity, and we're always on royal duty. And I look forward to seeing you in the next broadcast. Do leave me a juicy comment and let me know what you think. My tip jar is in the description box, and I'll see you next time. Toodle pip!